Jeffries?
Congratulations, Jeff.
For what?
For getting rid of that cast.
Who said I was getting rid of it?
This is Wednesday. 7 weeks from the day you broke your leg. Yes or no?
Gunnison, how did you ever get to be such a big editor with such a small memory?
Okay, record go.
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen. It's a show where we talk about movies, and specifically, we talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, a.k.a. TV's Travis, and this is episode number 244. And our movie this week is 1954's Rear Window, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and here to talk with me about it, she hadn't seen it before, it's Jeannie. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So last time you were on the show, we discussed a movie that kicked off the Disney animation renaissance. We talked about The Little Mermaid. You hadn't seen that one before. And then not too long ago, you kind of got a hold of me and you're like, hey, I haven't seen, you said you hadn't seen any Alfred Hitchcock movies?
That's correct. I've never seen any of them.
And so I said,
not even Psycho. I've seen, I've seen all the highlights that the clips that they always use when they talk about Hitchcock, but no, I've never actually seen any of his movies.
So I jumped at that chance because watching Alfred Hitchcock, I always love doing. And any excuse I have to watch his movies, to talk about his movies is great. So we talked a little bit about what to do, and we settled on Rear Window. So first thing I want to ask you is why Rear Window, and how is it that was Hitchcock just something that kind of was outside of your wheelhouse and you just never got around to it? So kind of give me a little background there.
I decided on Rear Window because, you had said you'd already watched Psycho, and I really didn't want to watch Psycho anyway because I wanted to do something a little different. Everybody talks about Psycho.
Sure.
I'm sure, with good reason. But I've heard about Rear Window, and we've seen that there are definitely modern movies that have taken the entire concept of it and redone it. In fact, we just had a couple of years ago with Kristen Bell, we had a kind of a parody of it. I had an idea of what it was about, but I never seen it.
Sure.
And it was probably the one that I knew the most about, even besides the birds and even then only vaguely.
Okay. So
I thought, well, let's watch that because, Jimmy Stewart's always fun to watch. So
yes.
So
I have seen Rear Window before, but it has been quite a while. You sort of always like the concept behind it is pretty simple. What I love about this movie is it follows my thing that I talk about a lot, which is keep the plot simple, but let the story unfold in a complex manner and make your characters more interesting and more complex. It doesn't have to be Memento, right? Of like this mind-bending narrative.
Right.
That can work, but you don't need that. You can bring your audience along for a fun ride and just make it interesting characters to talk about, and then casting those characters well. And Hitchcock was so good at manipulating his audience, which we're going to get into a little bit too, and kind of how he played them. So as your first Alfred Hitchcock film that you've seen now, overall, what did you think? How was that first watch experience?
Overall, it was a good experience. Hitchcock lives up to the hype. I really liked how, in addition to being simple, he starts small and just starts expanding. You're not really sure what is happening, and he just keeps expanding out everything that's going on around him. It also made me realize I am paranoid for a good reason, and curtains and blinds are a good thing.
Yes. Yes, on both accounts. I like both of those observations. It's great because the movie starts off first. What I love is classic movie openings where you have a song and you have your credits all up front. There's something fun about that, and kind of there's just a nostalgia for me looking at like old Hollywood and old films where they throw all the credits for you right up front.
Yeah.
Whether it's
before they change all the contracts.
Yeah. And it's, whether it's kind of a Saul Bass type opening with like really ornate animation that he would do for things like Psycho or the Pink Panther or whatever it was, or if it's this where it's just the words on the screen. But when you go back and rewatch this, if you do, pay attention to the framing of the image that you're seeing behind the credits, because right away Hitchcock is already starting his movie and starting what he's doing behind the credits in this, because he's got that big 3-bay window and they're slowly bringing the blinds up and you're slowly getting a reveal of this place before the credits end and they push in on the window like somebody walking up to the window to look outside. And I just absolutely love that. And plus the song playing, that jazzy tune that's going on, is like just this really fun upbeat. It doesn't really set you up at all for what the movie is going to be. So it's already messing with your expectations.
Not at all.
Yeah, it's got this jazzy upbeat thing and all that. And then suddenly the movie kind of flips on you and it's this paranoid thriller, really, that's going on. Hitchcock was the master of suspense. And that was his title given to him by people, and honestly, he earned it. I mean, he was so good at creating suspense and creating situations in movies where you're never entirely sure exactly what's going on from moment to moment, or if you do think you've got it figured out, he's kind of sitting back there watching you like, oh, just you wait. Like, we're going to have some fun with you. And I think the quote was from him was, I like to play the audience like a piano, which is really cool because like it's almost like he's watching you watch his movies while you're doing it, but from the outside in. And it's also fun that he always has his cameos in all of his movies. It's something that he did.
I spotted the Hitchcock cameo.
Oh yeah,
definitely spotted that. But one of the reasons I think one of the reasons why I had never watched any Hitchcock before is I have I guess you could say a mental block when it comes to something being labeled as a classic. Mm-hmm. Whether it's books or movies or TV shows. When people label something as classic, the implication to me is you're supposed to watch it. And I don't want to do what people want me to do. So I don't, if it's a classic, I have an inherent block. I'm not going to watch it. I mean, I didn't watch The Godfather until 4 years ago. Partly because I'd seen Goodfellas and Casino, and I realized that mob movies just aren't my thing. But
sure,
at the same time, Godfather is the one that everybody wants you to watch, so I'm not going to watch it. Classic books. Most classic books I've never read. I was surprised when I watched Dune. When I read Dune, because I liked the movie. I know I'm one of those people out there that liked the movie. Uh-huh. But I really enjoyed the book, but at the same time, I had read the book spaced out enough that I didn't have the movie intruding into what I was reading in the book.
Sure.
I had vague memories of scenes, but yeah, so I think that's probably why I never watched any Hitchcock before.
But that's interesting.
Yeah, he definitely lives up to the hype.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I understand that mindset, right? Of this idea that like, well, everybody's saying this thing is the thing that you should watch or you should read or you should listen to. I don't know. And I can understand that in part because sometimes you can then build unreasonable expectations of what that thing is going to be. And then when you watch it and it doesn't alter your perception or change your life in some profound way, it's very good, but it doesn't do that thing that's been built up for, then it can feel like a letdown, which is one of my things that I have been kind of talking about a lot, especially lately. But it's something that I have tried to do myself when it comes to my media literacy, whether it's reading a book, whether it's listening to an album, watching a movie, whatever it is to try and take the thing on its own merits. What is it? What is the movie? What is the book? Not what I think it should be or what others have told me it should be. That can factor into it, but I also want to say, like Dune, for instance. Dune's a great example because as a novel, Dune is so influential on so much science fiction and so much of what we think of in science fiction. But it has also been set on this pedestal, especially the novel of Dune, not even taking into account all of the subsequent novels and things that have gone on. That novel has been kind of put on this pedestal, and then I can talk to people who have read it in the last couple of years, especially younger people, and they're like, it's boring. It's just boring politics the whole way through. I was like, well, yes, I get that. It's dry. Lord of the Rings is another one. People that didn't grow up with that can read it, and it's going to read as a little bit dry. And somewhat boring because it's basically just a road novel. But you can also say, well, there's that, but there's also, you have to think about it in the context of when that thing was created as well. So like Rear Window, for instance.
For sure.
This movie, somebody could watch it today and think, well, that's not much of a thriller. Like it didn't keep me in suspense the whole time. I was kind of bored by it. But if you look at it from the lens of it's 1954 and you're going to a movie theater to watch this movie and you take it for what it is there, it changes things. Exorcist is another example. That's one I just recently was talking to people about where The Exorcist scared people in 1972, 1973 when it hit theaters.
For sure.
And people today are like, I don't get it. I don't see why it's scary. And you kind of have to think about the fact that, well, number one, like our whole world is different in the last 50 years. But with something like The Exorcist, which is so grounded in Catholicism and religion for ose impact, that's a totally different world than what we're getting now. And a lot of those reports of people fainting in movies and stuff, that was New York City, that was Chicago, that was, these places that are these big cities that have higher Catholic populations. It's going to hit completely different for them versus somebody agnostic.
And the whole concept of demon possession in 1972.
Oh yeah,
it's completely different than what it is now. Because I'll tell you, even when I saw the second one, Amityville 2, The Possession. Okay. I saw that when I was a teenager, and that was the 80s, and it was the height of the Satanic Panic. Okay, I grew up Catholic. Demon possession, terrifying. Amityville 2, The Possession, is not a good movie, and if I went back and saw it today, I would not be scared by it. I saw the protagonist in that movie at the end of my bed every night for a week.
Yeah.
It scared the crap out of me. And again, it's not a good movie. It's not on the same level. It's not even on the same level as Amityville, or The Exorcist, or the one with Damien.
The Omen.
The Omen.
Yeah.
The Omen. Those that entire concept of demon possession gripped people in a literally scare the crap out of you way at that time. It's totally different now. People don't see, because people actually believed in demon possession then. It's not as prevalent now. People still do believe in that, but not like they did then.
Certainly not as widespread as it was then. There's pockets of it today, but there's so much more, and part of it is we have so much more media, we have so much more information at our fingertips, and also we've got 50 years of derivative movies and derivative stories telling that story, that something like slasher films, if you're into slasher films, all of your slasher films owe a debt to Halloween and Black Christmas and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And people that watch those today for the first time and have never seen them before say, well, they're boring or they're dumb or I didn't find it scary at all. But without those movies had to walk so that the rest of these franchises could run. And Hitchcock...
Pacing is so much different.
Oh, pacing is completely different. I mean, filmmaking in general. Hitchcock was so good at creating the suspense and pacing things, but it's a different era of filmmaking. Like, this movie is very suspenseful if you really dig into it and you start to think about it. And what makes it work for me is two things. Number one, it's the way Alfred Hitchcock plays the audience and sets everything inside of one apartment and this little apartment building or complex. And that's where you are, which I kind of want to dive into a little bit more in a minute. But the other thing that makes this work is Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart as your protagonist in this, because as a person, as an actor, you like him. He's a friendly, jovial person. He comes across very nice. And his character, for the most part, is okay, but he's also a little bit morally gray. Just a little bit. He's kind of on the fence of things, where he's like, he's just sitting in his apartment.
I was surprised at that.
Yeah. He's kind of a peeping Tom.
Because of Jimmy... Yeah, because of Jimmy Stewart's reputation as an actor and his roles, he's very likable, he's very nice, and he's kind of borderline asshole in this. He really is.
Yeah. You know what it reminds me of is, which movie was it? I think it was Once Upon a Time in the West that cast Henry Fonda as the villain. I want to say it was Once Upon a Time in the West. And, like, that was a huge thing at the time because, like, Henry Fonda was the man and he was the protagonist. He was always the good guy. And so in that
Grapes
movie...
of Wrath, 12 Angry Men, he's always the pinnacle of he's a paragon of virtue.
Yes. And then in that movie,
everybody
you see
liked him and he was the hero.
Yeah. And then you see him in Once Upon a Time in the West and he's not a good person. And it screws with your head a little bit. And so having Jimmy Stewart be not the nicest person in the world, like he's not a bad person by any stretch, but I had notes here like, boy, why you got to be such a dick to her? Like that kind of thing as I'm watching it this time again.
Yeah, one of my notes were, why are you with her if you hate everything about her?
Right, exactly. And so, like, for him to be that character, you instinctively like him, but now you're like, ooh, I don't know about him. So now he becomes slightly untrustworthy. And now you as the audience get to question his motivations, his leaps in logic, and what is it he's seeing and not seeing, because coupled with and compounded by the fact that we are in his apartment with him the entire movie. We never leave it. We never see anything he can't see. And we never have a conversation with anyone that he isn't having a conversation with. And I think that is some of the brilliance of this movie is everything is through the lens of L.B. Jeffries.
Yeah.
And so
I was questioning things. I was going back and forth throughout the whole movie. Is this really happening?
Yeah.
Is that really happening? Or is he just being paranoid? Because it's also kind of an exploration of one man's paranoia.
Yeah.
And how that escalates.
Yeah. And how it not only escalates
Did that
for
really
him.
happen? I don't know.
Yeah. And it escalates for him and then it spreads to other people. Right? Because now all of a sudden, Liza, she gets it. Grace Kelly, who is phenomenal in this. Grace Kelly was so, I loved every minute with her. Yeah. And with Stella, with Thelma Ritter's character, she starts to get in on it. And then they're both part of it. And I was like
unwillingly too.
A little bit, but also there's an interesting dynamic between L.B. Jeffries and Liza. Because they have this relationship, and it's established at the beginning of the movie that they have been in this relationship for a while. But she has very deep feelings for him and wants to settle down. And there's something about, he's in this mindset of like, And I think it's kind of two-pronged, right? There's some self-deprecation of it where it's like, she's too perfect to be with me. She's too beautiful. I'm just some schlub who takes pictures and traipses around the world doing that and living paycheck to paycheck. And also a sense of like, well, she's this uptown kind of almost aristocratic person, right? She's been a model. She works for these big companies, is used to money. That's not the type of person I want, because I'm going to be wearing combat boots and going out taking pictures on the Serengeti. And so it's like this double-sided, she's too good for me, she's not good enough to be in my world, or, that kind of thing going on. Meanwhile, she's just like, I love you. Yeah. And I love the line, I'm in love with you, and I just want to be a part of that. Like, I just want to be a part of your life in some way. She didn't care how. Didn't matter to her. She was bringing a lot of her life to him, right? Bringing the guy from the restaurant to cook or bring food or whatever it was. But at the end of the day, she really wouldn't have cared at all. No. So when he starts to get paranoid,
she was more concerned that he wasn't eating.
Yeah. Yes. And then when he starts getting paranoid and that paranoia rises, it infects her with it, because she wants to be part of his life so badly that she's willing to make some of these leaps with him, even though at first they don't make sense to her, right? Because at first she's like, no, whatever, you're just being weird. Quit staring at other people. And then she joins in, and then she gets proactive about it, and she wants to even go further than he's willing to go. So I thought that was really interesting. But again, I come back to, I just love the fact that we get, as an audience, plop down in this apartment with James Stewart, and we don't leave. We can't leave. All we ever see is what's out his window. And the camera never goes into any of those other apartments except through the windows.
No.
Which I thought was really cool. That too, and I don't know if you noticed this or if it registered or not, but all the sound, all the music, save for that opening song, is diegetic. It's all within the scenes. It's all what they are hearing. Like, if we're hearing music, L.B. Jeffries is hearing that music. And I love that too. There's just something. That is definitely something that I noticed. I'm like, okay, the score is all the piano guy. Yep. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow. What a different way to use a score.
Yeah, and what a fun way to bring your audience into your movie and really then create a world around that. We literally never leave this courtyard in this apartment. And what I love about it too is, again, it's old school filmmaking where that's all just a big set they built on a back lot. And if you're looking, like, you can tell where the set ends, and they just had like facade for the skyline. And there's something I just love about that look of things. But what an amazing set to build too. Like, thing was big, and it's that romanticized.
And what
go ahead.
Something else I thought, kind of aside from that, this is the classic where at this point we are well versed in what the look is of New York.
Yes.
And it's very obvious that this is a courtyard of a group of apartment buildings in New York.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
They only mention it once, but it's very obvious right from the start.
Yes, and it's that classic New York. It's like if you've ever seen The Apartment or anything from this kind of era, that's what New York looked like, and it's that romanticized version of like what you want New York to be. And there's just something really cool about that, where our only glimpse to the world beyond this courtyard is that little alleyway that goes out to the street, and we just see occasional shots that show cars drive by and people walking by and that little restaurant, and that's it. For 6 weeks, this man's entire world has existed within these like 4 buildings. So I can understand where the paranoia happens, by the way. If you're stuck inside that room with nothing to watch, he didn't have a TV. He didn't have the internet. He didn't have a bunch of books to read. He was just sleeping in a wheelchair and watching his neighbors. And I like too the use of lighting, the use of lighting in the movie, because again, him in his position, if the lights are off or the shades are drawn, that might as well not exist, right? There's just nothing there. Yeah. And so we as an audience, same thing. We don't know then what's going on in there. Yeah. So now we get to fill in some blanks. We get to produce our own story. And he used that. Yeah,
and
himself.
Inside of his apartment, not just the light, inside of his apartment itself, the use of shadow.
Yes.
Impressive. Seriously impressive.
Some great stuff, like with him half in shadow, and then his lower half would be, not in the shadow. But so he's riding that fence. He's not fully in the dark, but he's not fully in the light either. Or he would be, when there was nothing for him to look at, when there was nothing for him to do but kind of stew in his own thoughts, he'd be fully lit. But then when he wasn't quite sure if what he was doing was right or not, he'd back up and he'd be in that shadow. He'd be partially behind it, or somebody else would be that way. And again, this is Hitchcock framing his shots and staging everything and doing all this stuff. And then he has the brilliance to bring in the character of Tom Doyle, the detective. And that first scene with him is so good because before I get to Tom Doyle, let's go back to the beginning of the movie, because that opening where it pushes in on the window and then we just get a couple of panning shots, right? We get a pan around the courtyard, looking into the different windows, kind of seeing everybody. And then we see him sleeping, and then we see the next layer of people. So we've got the couple sleeping on their fire escape, which cracked me up because it's like,
me too. I was like, oh, the days before Central Air. Okay.
Yep. When it's 95 degrees in New York, what are you going to do? Sleep outside. Which was great then when it started raining, because I'm like, that's the downside to it. Now you got to haul all that crap back in. But you had that couple.
But
go ahead.
And the interesting thing about sleeping outside is it kind of reminded me. I did a tour of I forget what the name of the estate is it's in North Carolina, but it's one of the tobacco barons, one of the cigarette company guys. Their estate is you can do a tour of it. Okay. And one of the things from the turn of the century, that time frame, is when tuberculosis was very prevalent. That is one of the things that they would do, is they would sleep outside because they thought it was healthier. So I kind of reminded me of that entire mindset, because 1954 isn't that far away from that.
No, not as far as you would think. That's interesting. Yeah. But you have them, and then we see Miss Torso, the ballet dancer, and she's very open with herself. She's got her windows wide open. She's wandering around dancing, and she doesn't care that people are watching her. She, a lot of them don't. No. But we see the musician, and he's always playing that same piano piece, trying to perfect that. And that first little bit of the movie, we meet all of these characters, and we sort of already begin to build our idea of who they are. You've got the weird couple sleeping on their fire escape, the couple that are kind of squabbling, and she's sick on the bed, and he's, kind of in and out, and it seems like she nags him a lot. And you've got the lady downstairs that we don't know yet is kind of single by herself. Her story unfolds a little bit later, and you've got the newlywed couple coming into the apartment for the first time, and you sort of get this, which their story was kind of fun for me too, just because of the way it unfolded. Where they seem so happy when they come inside, and then they close the blinds, and you sort of forget about them for a while, and then they pop up a couple of times, and each time you start to question what's going on with them now each time, because he sort of opens the window, and then you just hear his name in the background, and he kind of closes the window and goes to her. And it's sort of like, well, what's going on with them? We don't really know until the very end. And all this stuff is going on. And then when Tom Doyle comes along, by this point, Jeff thinks that, the guy across the way's done something. He doesn't know exactly what yet, but something nefarious has happened. He thinks he's maybe offed his wife or something. When Doyle gets there, that whole scene, Hitchcock sets it up to make you not believe that Jeff saw what he saw. Because we saw Mr. Thorwald leave his apartment with somebody while Jeffries was asleep. So we as the audience have that information that he doesn't. And then Doyle, even the way everything is framed, Tom is always framed in the center of the frame. He's the focal point of it. He's usually framed to be like he's standing while Jeffries is sitting in the wheelchair, so he's above him in the conversation. Like there's some of those visual cues. And everything is framed and meant to kind of put that seed of doubt in your head, which is brilliant at that point in the movie, because now for the rest of the movie, we're not really sure. Maybe it's something going on, maybe not. And you can interpret it whatever way you want. And that's what's so good about it, is everything that happens from then on is done so ambiguously, and then not having the context of like, there's no dialogue between L.B. Jeffries and any of these people. Except for Stella, Tom, and Liza. Like that's it. Nobody else does he talk to. So we don't get any of that. I just love that. I love that storytelling kind of mechanism.
We don't even hear Thorwald really speak. We hear him through the phone.
Yep.
And then at the end when he's in the apartment. That's the only time we actually hear him speak. I mean, it's kind of faded off into the background, but really that's the only time we actually hear him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other than that, it's like you get, and we don't hear any of them, which is kind of interesting, right? We never hear Mrs. Torso or Miss Torso. And so all we know about her is basically what Jeffries has inferred. Like he's inferred that, and I love that he has this idea that she is like just sort of young and living her life and just being with whoever she wants to. And
she's a bit of a gadfly.
Yeah, and Grace Kelly's character, Lisa, I think it was Liza, but she comes in, and she comes in and immediately pegs it, right? Her first thing is like, no. She doesn't love any of those guys. She doesn't care about any of them. She's just doing this to help like further her career. She's getting something out of it, but it's not a fulfilling relationship or anything she's looking for. This is just like kind of purely professional type stuff she's doing. And and then there's that mirror, because that's kind of how she feels about Jeffries. She has all this stuff going on and could have her pick of just about anybody, but she loves this dude for whatever reason, and is going to stick with him. So like, there's that going on. And then you've got Mrs. Lonely Heart down in her apartment. And when we first really see her, it's her sitting there having a fake date with someone, like an imaginary person.
Right.
Which is,
I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. It's like, it's heartbreaking to watch. And then she breaks down, and a little bit of that is kind of, that's L.B. Jeffries. That's the path he could go down. Not necessarily the way he would act, but his mentality of like, no, she's too good for me. I don't belong with her. I don't belong with anybody. This is sort of a little bit of a glimpse into what his future could be like, being alone all the time. And that is, I think, a little bit scary for him when Mrs. Lonely Heart grabs all the sleeping pills. And of course the nurse would know what those are. I loved her comment on that. I've given out enough of those to put down like a hippo or whatever it was, or half of whatever burrow. Like it was so good. But
and I was honestly, I was just as concerned about her as I was about Lisa in the apartment. I was like, wait a minute, go back. What's going on with her?
I was too.
Did she take them? Please don't take them.
And I was really concerned about that too. And then I love how her story wraps up, that because we saw a glimpse of it early, It's one of those things that Hitchcock showed his hand a little bit earlier, where Mrs. Lonely Heart's getting upset, but she starts to hear the music, and I think Lisa mentions it at some point, and we see like a moment where everybody's sort of listening to the music for just a second, and then it kind of fades out because he hasn't finished the song yet. He just hasn't. Piano Man hasn't gotten there, and then Mrs. Lonely Heart spirals again. But that's what ends up pulling her out of it, is she finds something worthwhile in this music later on. That's that thing of beauty. That's that thing she was missing that kind of pulls her out of the funk, and then she can then connect with somebody, because her problem was, whether you're really whoever you are, we kind of all need a little bit of that, some social interaction, some companionship in some form. For some people, it's a significant other. Yeah. For some people, it's a pet, whatever it is, but you need something. And she didn't have that.
Yeah.
But then to be able to make that connection with
something
the music.
Outside yourself.
Yes. Yes. And she was able to make that connection to the music, and thus the Piano Man, who, so, you know, you have to wonder where her story goes from there, but at the same time, it kind of, I don't need to know either. I'm just glad to know that it didn't go. When I first saw her breaking down and writing the note, that was the moment when she starts writing the letter. After we've seen the sleeping pills and she sets us out, when she starts writing that letter out, I'm like, oh no, please don't go there. I don't want that. Because again, it'd been so long since I'd seen the movie. Parts of it I didn't remember. Like, I didn't remember that bit of her story. Like, most of what I remembered was Thorwald and, just Jimmy Stewart looking out his rear window. So I was like, oh, let's not, please don't go this route with her. And they didn't. So that was a good thing. It's more optimistic than that. And you have the moment with the dog ends up dead. We never.
Oh, crushed me.
Oh, it did me too.
That poor dog.
I mean, first one-way ticket to make me upset in a movie is to kill off a pet. And we don't.
I did love the little basket.
Yeah, that was great.
That they had for the dog. That was so cool.
There again, that's that old New York, like in a city sort of setup of like, you'd never do that today. It would never happen. But this idea that they would just lower the basket down with the pup in it, and the dog could get out and run around the courtyard where it wasn't going to run away, and then eventually just come back up in the basket, I thought was awesome. It was so great.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that the dog getting even attacked is off screen, and there's never any resolution to that. So
yeah.
I assume that it was Thorwald that did it. And the movie strongly hints at that, but they never I don't think ever come out completely and say. Maybe they did right at the end.
Yeah, they do. At the end, the cop that was questioning Thorwald in his in the apartment said something about because the dog was digging it up, and he had dug it out.
Yeah,
dug it up and put it in the hat box.
Yeah,
whatever it was, and they never even mentioned what it was that the dog was digging at.
Yeah, that's true. They didn't. So yeah, it's just there's so much to this. The only other Grace Kelly and Jimmy Stewart carry this movie, but Raymond Burr as Lars Thorwald had a lot to do in terms of like.
Oh.
That
completely slipped by me that it was Raymond Burr. Okay.
Well,
that makes sense.
When you only see him from long distances like that.
Without the beard.
And without the beard, right. Like, I didn't recognize him at first. Yeah. And then you find out, oh no, it's Perry Mason. Which is just like, whoa, hold on. Wait a second.
Yeah, I realize that now. Yeah.
But he has so much to do because he has to look both suspicious in his actions and yet also be doing things that could easily be just mundane and sort of explained away. And that's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
Like,
no.
And he manages to do both sometimes leaning a little more in one direction or another, but usually if he's looking more suspicious, it's when we get it's from the like farther view, and when we zoom in on him, it's much more innocuous, which I thought was kind of interesting. Like,
and he's doing it by himself.
Yeah,
he's not working off of someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he doesn't have. I mean, he has one scene with with Jimmy Stewart, and outside of that, he has no dialogue with anybody that's on, that's prominent. It's all stuff happening across the courtyard. It's just such a well-structured thing. And then the way, like I say, the way Hitchcock plays with the audience, keeping everything that way, putting it all in the one apartment and leaving us there and not letting us go and get this other information is what creates the tension in it. Because now we're stuck with Jeffries, and we're stuck inside of his paranoia. And even if you don't buy him, if you don't think he's right at all, and you're like, nah, this guy's crazy, he's just making up stories, like, that's a perfectly plausible explanation. And because it just turns out he wasn't that far off.
He ended up being right. Doesn't mean he wasn't waking it up. He was making up a story in his head.
Yes. But there, pardon me, there again is that kind of ethical ambiguity, right? That sort of moral gray area that he's living in. And I like that he is. I also enjoy the fact that L.B. Jeffries is cognizant of that. He has a conversation with her at one point talking about, is it ethical for me to be looking in these windows or not? And he's sort of like, no, not really. But also, if somebody has the lights on and the shades up and the curtains, not drawn up, and you happen to look in and see something, maybe you shouldn't be busting out binoculars and or a very long focus lens to do that. That's kind of where he crosses some lines. Maybe. Just saying. But his counter to that is like, they can look back at me if they want to. And so that in some ways justifies it in his head. It doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
Like, still don't do that. Don't get out a telephoto lens.
Because in the end, they don't know that he's doing it.
Right. And there is an expectation of privacy in your home. Even if that home is a little studio apartment with windows facing a courtyard, like there still is. So that brings that into focus, right? It's like he's not a paragon of virtue, but yet if he wasn't doing what he was doing, then the murder of this woman probably would have gone unsolved, and this guy might have gotten away with it. So it's sort of, because it's Jimmy Stewart, we like him, so we're predisposed to believe what he's saying, and then slowly we kind of get it unraveling. And I actually thought that everything going on with Stella and Liza was kind of playing into his paranoia. At one point, I even wondered, I was like, do I remember this movie just like as he woke up from a fever dream or something? Like, because everything seemed to be playing out almost too perfectly, right, for his story.
Yeah.
But them following him, I think, and sort of buying into his paranoia fed it and kept it going. I think if the two of them, especially, because Tom didn't buy it, but Jeff never really cared what Tom had to say in a lot of ways. Like, but if Stella and Liza had both sort of tried to talk him off the ledge, he probably could have been swayed to be like, you know what, maybe I have just been cooped up for too long, and get out of this cast and he'll be fine. Instead, he's going to be in another cast for 6 or 7 weeks because now he's got 2 broken legs at the end. So here's a question for you, because I did watch a real short portion of an interview with David Lynch, of all people. David Lynch was talking about this movie and how much he liked it, and how
interesting.
He liked the cozy nature of it, the fact that small scale nature and how everything just takes place in that one room and all of this. But he did say that he hates the ending. He just was like, the ending is just terrible, which I I kind of understand where he's coming from on that. But I'm curious, what did you think of the ending of actually it being, yes, Lars Thorwald did kill his wife, and like the whole thing, he comes and he tries to strangle and throw him off the out the window and all that kind of stuff. Did you like that kind of a resolution, or were you expecting it to go in a different direction? Kind of how did that play out for you?
I wasn't thrilled about it. I thought it was an interesting way for him to deal with it, being in the chair and the flash.
Yes.
I thought that was kind of innovative in the way that he did that. However, it did kind of veer off of what my expectation was, because I thought what was going to end up happening was we're so focused on Thorwald, and the problem was Miss Lonely Hearts.
Yep.
I thought that's where it was going to go.
So I actually thought it was going to be
didn't.
the newlywed couple. Was where my brain was going.
Oh, okay.
The newlyweds
yeah, I could see
would
that.
be
I could see that. But yeah, I
was
expecting a left turn.
Yeah.
Is what I was expecting.
I think the reason that I ended up falling off the newlywed thing well before the final reveal was that would have felt too much like a cheap whodunit revealing the killer is somebody completely unrelated in the last 5 pages. That is a character you've never seen before at all. So I didn't feel like Hitchcock would do that. So then I was like, no, it's going to be something to do with Miss Lonely Heart. And like, that's going to be the thing. And he sort of like, and Jeff just didn't pay enough attention to her and what was going on, even seeing the warning signs.
Kind of going back to that rant of the lady with the dog talking about how neighbors are supposed to take care of each other.
Yes.
And I thought that was going to be kind of the throughput from there to there, that he's so focused on Thorwald and he's so off base, and the real problem ends up being Miss Lonely Hearts making a suicide attempt.
Yeah.
I would have liked that ending. I think I would have liked that ending better. But it was fine for what it was. But it also, when he fell out the window like that, I just last week I watch a lot of true crime stuff, and there's this on, I think it's on Peacock or Hulu, one of them, where they tell stories of things that happen in court. Okay, in courts throughout the country, and there's one where this guy in handcuffs ran out of a courtroom that he was getting ready to be sentenced for, or something like that, and he fell off the second floor balcony.
Oh, geez.
Of the court onto the floor, and there was a guard that actually ran to try and catch him, and they had been talking about if he had actually gotten under him and caught him, he would have been seriously hurt. And I'm like, and then this whole thing where the two guys kind of catch Jimmy Stewart. I'm like, no, you're gonna get hurt.
Don't do it. I will say,
because that's a big drop.
It is. That is a big drop. And he's wearing that big old cast on there too, which is not going to give at all. I will say that I don't love the ending, because I'm with you. I think that it could have been a more interesting ending to go a little bit subversion of sort of what we're expecting, and kind of play on the paranoia part of things more. I also, I think from a visual standpoint, we've spent so much of the movie with these like grand sweeping shots of everything and these slow camera movements and all of that. And then to speed up the film at the end gave it sort of that Benny Hill quality when people were running out of one apartment to get to the other one. And I didn't like that. I thought that kind of hurt it a little bit. But the nice thing is the movie leading up to that is so good that I can give that a lot of a pass. Because again, these characters become interesting, and we only get these slices of them. But like Miss Torso ends up with her man coming home from the military, and we meet who he is real quickly there at the end. And you've got the newlywed couple. Things are okay. The tension there was because he had just quit his job and they just got married. And I thought, okay, I'm glad that they gave us something there. And we talked about Miss Lonely Heart and the fire escape couple getting a new puppy and using the basket again, and kind of all of that, and sort of things not necessarily going back to the way that they were, but moving forward from what they were. Everybody is back.
Yeah.
The artist lady is back out, sitting in her little courtyard and all that. I really liked all of that. It was just that little bit there where, because even when he calls Thorwald and kind of does the blackmail thing of like, you need to go to wherever so they can get into his apartment. I kind of, even at that point, he's acting suspicious, but you're still not entirely sure. You're not 100% sure he actually did the thing. So it would have been really...
No, not at all.
Would have been really cool if it was, instead of he did kill his wife, if it was he was just cheating on her in some way, and that's what came out, but then the real problem was the other person or something like that. There were a few different ways you could have gone with the end of this. But I think that overall it's still, so much of it is so solid, and it's that building of tension. It's that ratcheting it up. And I also understand why Hitchcock went the direction that he did, because you need some sort of a payoff at the end. And you're right in that visually it was very interesting to use the flashbulb to blind the guy when he comes into the apartment. Keep all the lights off and then blind him, even if it didn't work very well. It was still inventive to do.
Now one of the tensest moments of the movie for me was when Grace Kelly was out on that fire escape and trying to move to the other window in heels.
Yes.
I was like, oh my God.
I think my exact thing was climbing into that window in heels. She's crazy. Because I was half expecting that was going to be the big thing. And like, again, I'd just forgotten, like, did she fall? Because holy crap, it's enough that she starts climbing up the ladder in the heels, but then she gets to that fire escape and she's like, well, this window's locked. Oh, this one's open. I'll just, sure. No net, no nothing, I'll just do this. No. You're crazy. So.
Exactly.
I did capture a couple of audio clips from the movie. I thought was kind of
okay.
Again, there's good stuff in here, and it's Hitchcock's movies don't necessarily always have like the craziest dialogue. It's not a quippy movie, right? It's not that era of filmmaking. But I love some of this stuff. We've got like Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart's always good. He was always good and everything. It was one of those things. He was just fun to watch, and I love things like this is him talking about his cast on his leg. He's on the phone with his editor at the beginning of the movie, and he mentions his cast as,
next Wednesday I emerge from this plaster cocoon.
This plaster cocoon. Next Wednesday, like the guy was off by a week, and again. There's all the sound. The music you're hearing in the background is somebody's radio from one of the other apartments, and the only sound effects are him like slapping his giant cast, which, oof, that cast went from his waist to his foot. Like that's rough.
That's rough.
That's not a good one.
I actually had a friend of mine's child had fallen through one of those window wells, and she had a cast like that. It was awful. Awful. And the scratcher that he's using, absolutely spot on. Absolutely spot on.
I will say, so I didn't have to have a cast, but I have had a walking boot for a while, and that was bad enough. My dad had a cast from foot to knee, so just his lower leg. But yeah, he had what he used. We didn't have a scratcher like that, but he had my sister had some slap bracelets, which were those metal bands, And he would use that. He would, or like a metal ruler, and he would just push that down in there and scratch his leg.
Yeah.
So I saw that and I was like, oh yeah, that's that one. I can identify with that. This is both. I don't remember what this one was. So here we go.
What do you do? Are you interested in solving this case or in making me look foolish?
Well, if possible, both.
I liked that. Because again, there's Tom. That's that first scene with Tom Doyle. And it's such a great response to the question. Because Jeffries is legitimately asking him this, and he's just like, whatever, dude. Both. I'll make you look like an idiot and prove you wrong. And they're like, that's the type of banter you only get when you have a strong bond with someone. So I did like that.
For sure.
Here's him again on the phone with his editor.
If you don't pull me out of this swamp of boredom, I'm going to do something drastic.
Swamp of boredom. I want to use that. And then I like to, what do you mean drastic? I don't know, like get married. So that was good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gotta love the 50s for that one.
Mm-hmm. Stella. Stella's a great character. The nurse. She is. By the way, she's an insurance company nurse. That's not something we really have anymore. Like, that was a product of its time. She works for the insurance company to take care of him.
Yeah, no, insurance companies still do send out nurses. They're just usually hire a company to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. You're right. But it was the thing where I was like, boy, that feels very much like a 1950s thing. We don't have a lot of that anymore. But
actually, what felt like it for me, because my dad has had some visiting nurses.
Okay.
Is the massaging.
Yeah. Yeah.
I work in healthcare. I admit I'm kind of on peripheral. I'm administrative support, stuff like that. So there's things that I don't necessarily see. But if a patient was going to get a massage, there was a massage therapist going to do that. Mm-hmm. The nurse had better things to do.
Yeah. Yep. Not back then. She's that classic, sassy nurse too, right? She's the tough love nurse of like, we're going to do this. We're going to take care of you because, damn it, you need it and you need to listen to me. So it's like when she, when she,
I'm not dealing with your nonsense.
Yes, exactly. When she gets the massage oil or whatever, and he's like, can't you heat that stuff up? Nah, it's good for your circulation. Like, shut up. I liked her a lot. And she did this one, which is, I'll just play this and then talk about it.
Overproduction, I says.
I don't know what it is about that turn of phrase where you state a thing as an I says. There's just something I love about that. So it's her talking about like her intuition.
50s, 60s.
It is. As overproduction, I says. It's this, I says. Or I says to the guy. I loved that. Also, she's giving him the third degree about his relationship and that, he's got this beautiful woman who loves him and is madly in love with him and wants to marry him. And he's being a dingus about it. And he says that there's an intelligent way to go about these things. And her response to that is perfect.
Nothing has caused the human race so much trouble as intelligence.
Boy, if that ain't true. Like, intelligence or the idea.
Well, you can't think your way through emotions.
No, you can't. But also, like, intelligence has given us so much, but then you've got to balance that with sort of self-awareness, and that's the thing that a lot of people don't have. And so her that statement was just great.
Yeah.
Nothing has caused the human race more
and we as a
trouble.
society have really only gotten worse with that. We always try to think our way through emotions. You have to feel them. You can't just talk about them try to intelligence your way through the whole thing because they don't make sense. They're not supposed to.
No, things have gotten better. That is one thing that I do see as getting a lot better in the last 5 to 10 years is being, especially for a long time, men were supposed to be stoic and not have emotions. And that whole stigma is breaking down, and it's okay. Like there's still idiots out there that don't believe that you should have any emotions ever. Yeah. And that crying is a sign of weakness and all of that. And it's not. But
and the only emotion they're allowed is anger, and nobody and they don't classify it as an emotion. That's just crazy.
Yeah. So I could get up on a soapbox and talk about that all night, but the change.
Yeah, we could talk about that for the next hour.
just like the idea was always that men need to be stoic and not have any emotions and think everything through, and the only thing that they can feel is anger, blah blah blah. And then the flip side of that was that for a long time, and still unfortunately for some people now, that women are hysterical and only emotional and they can't think rationally. None of that's true. That's all horse shit.
Yeah.
We all have emotions.
You can't fully think rationally without including the emotion in it to give it context.
Mm-hmm. And you can't have nothing but emotions without being able to take a second and try to think rationally or listen to a rational thought either. There has to be a balance there. So that is one thing that I'm glad we're getting better at. But I just loved her line of nothing has caused more problems than intelligence. So we mentioned kind of that morale, that ethical gray area that Jeffries is sort of existing in. And then you get Liza is falling into that with him, but she has that moment of realization. And I think that's what ultimately makes them still likable characters by the end, is they question what's going on a little bit. And they're sort of questioning their motives and their reasoning behind stuff. And her line here was one of those.
We're two of the most frightening ghouls I've ever known.
Two of the most, because it's that realization of, in that moment of like, oh God, we're terrible. Why are we doing this? We're ghouls.
Yeah.
And that to me was like, okay, now there's good in these people.
Is this really happening, or is it something that we want to be happening?
Yes, exactly that. So that I really did like. Again, the character of L.B. Jeffries, a little bit of a dick to her. Like not the early on, especially, he does not treat her well. And at one point even says,
a true statement, but I can back it up if you just shut up for a minute.
First of all, you got the Jimmy Stewart, shut up for a minute. Like the way, but then that scene, so that scene can be read so many different ways, right? There's a part of you that can identify with Jeffries in the scene where he is trying to say, we didn't get the first part of it. Whatever the first thing was that he said, we didn't hear. And now he's trying to like justify and sort of back up his statement. Meanwhile, on the other side of it, she's just cutting him off every time he starts to talk. And so, because she doesn't like the first thing that he said. So he's getting more and more frustrated because he's like, no, if you just let me explain, it'll make sense. And she's like, you're not going to explain this. I don't care. And I'm not going to let you get a word in. And it's that wonderful like back and forth of like, there's a butting of heads there. And when he says that to her and she's like, well, if you're going to be rude about it, it's like, no, he is being rude. I didn't like the way he was treating her there. Even if I understood what he was trying to do, I'm like, this could all have been fixed if people could just communicate better.
And he kept telling her to shut up. And I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah. Like once I might be able to be like, okay, we'll move on from that. But then he said it again and he said it again. I'm like, dude, seriously, back off. Just like, let's not do that.
Yeah.
So that was one, but it's also just that delivery. If you just shut up for a minute, is so good because that's Jimmy Stewart the whole way. But yeah, he's just
and that stutter at the beginning.
Yeah,
too.
One of the things I always love about Jimmy Stewart whenever I see him in anything is he's usually just playing a lot of variations of the same character. Like he's always Jimmy Stewart. It's just which part is he emphasizing? Like which is the more prominent bit? But he always feels so natural in the role that he's playing. Like it never feels like Jimmy Stewart playing a character, even though he absolutely is playing a character. But there's something just natural and realistic about his delivery of things. And I think it is a little bit of that stutter that he gets in there, and this slightly flummoxed at times, but then there's other times where he's just smooth as silk. So it works.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, Get Out.
And out of my life, you're perfectly wonderful woman. You're too good for me.
Sorry. That was Stella. Okay. That was another Stella one. But go ahead. What were you going to say before I cut you off? I'll play that again.
No, I was just going to, I was just saying, I didn't realize how strikingly blue his eyes are.
Oh, I know. Well,
I was just like intensely blue. And and in this, I think this is before It's a Wonderful Life.
No. This is
I always knew he was considered handsome.
Mm-hmm.
I always considered that he was handsome, and I just until this one, it just never struck me just how handsome he was.
Yeah, so this was 1954. It's a Wonderful Life is 39? I think.
Okay.
Or 41 maybe. It's a Wonderful Life is 46. Okay, so he's a few years younger in It's a Wonderful Life. Okay. The thing about it is, though, what's the first thing you think of when you think of Jimmy Stewart? It's probably It's a Wonderful Life is usually what most people think. Black and white, right? A lot of his stuff was black and white. Yeah. He did color.
Yeah.
But a lot of what, so then to see him in this, and it's Technicolor too, so it's just that like punchy, bright, vibrant color. And you're right, his eyes are just so blue. And yeah, he was a really good looking man. Ace in the chat mentions Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. That's the other thing. Like the two titles that pop into my head immediately when you say Jimmy Stewart, I think of It's a Wonderful Life and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. But they're both black and white.
Yeah.
And to see him in something like this is great. But you're right. He's a very handsome looking. Everybody in this movie really is striking.
Well,
you know, it's Hollywood.
Grace Kelly,
I mean, that's
Angel on Earth, I swear.
Yeah, that's almost not fair, really, Grace Kelly.
Yeah.
And then she's climbing over stuff in heels. Come on. Like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
But, yeah. No, okay, so this was a clip. This was another Stella clip I loved because this is, again, her just taking the mickey out of Jimmy Stewart's character where it's like, you got a beautiful woman. It's the way she does this.
Get out of my life, you perfectly wonderful woman. You're too good for me.
And he's just done with it. He's dealt with her for 6 weeks. Probably 5 of those 6 weeks have been this constant with her. Just that sigh from Jeffries is so it just killed me. It was so good. And then one last one, and this is Tom Doyle, and he's questioning Jimmy Stewart. He's questioning Jeffries at this point about what happened, and I like this line.
Now, did anyone, including you, actually see her murdered?
Did anyone, including you, actually see her murdered, or not? Because at this point we're still, and it's kind of unraveling in a way. And as the audience, you're like, well, no, actually we didn't, and we saw a woman leave with Thorwald.
It's a legit question.
It's a good one. It's a damn good movie. It's a really good movie. Now
it is.
Here's my question for you. Based on the fact that we've now established that if someone tells you something is great and you should see it or you should read it, your instinct is to buck at that and to be like, no, don't want to. I'm not gonna because you say so, which I get totally.
Well, that and also the first classic book that I remember being assigned to read was Wuthering Heights in high school. So it's so boring. So boring. And that I kind of associate boring with classic.
Sure.
I think is part
I think
of it too.
I can understand that. I know for me, some of the things that I hadn't seen, movies are going to be the first thing I go to because it's what I do. I talk about them. But like The Shawshank Redemption was one that people kept telling, you see it on the top of lists all the time and all this stuff. And I hadn't seen it. And it wasn't a thing that I actively avoided. I just hadn't. And so when I finally sat down and watched it and did it for episode 100 of this show, I went to some friends of mine that had talked to me about it, and I'm like, you people undersold this movie, damn it. Like, it was better than you told me it was. And my experience has been that typically, if something is regarded as a classic, that it usually is that for a reason and it lives up to that expectation. There are times where it wasn't a classic, but the first time I saw Rian Johnson's Brick, which was being hailed as this neo-noir type of movie, and so many people were loving it. And the first time I saw it, I had unfortunately built the expectation up too high, and I didn't quite have the media literacy that I do now and that I'm still striving towards, where it was I can look at the thing under its own merits. And instead, I built up too much, and then I saw it and I was like, it's all right. Nothing special. But then I watch more Rian Johnson stuff, and I go back and I watch Brick again, and I realize, boy, I was way off. Like, it's great. It's great.
That I haven't seen. Now I did. I will say, I am on the side of Last Jedi.
Oh, I am
Good
too.
Movie.
No, Last Jedi of those
and
three.
I think that's going to end up being probably hailed as the best of the three
easily
in about 20 years.
Easily, because it tried something new and it went in a different direction. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things where it's always tricky. It's a double-edged sword to call something a classic, because you never know what type of baggage the person watching it or reading it is going to bring in, and how they're going to look at it and how it's going to affect them. But typically my experience has been if something is widely regarded as a classic, and it's different from like a cult classic. Cult classic is its own sort of thing where you kind of have to really be into the thing that is the cult classic, and it's hard to break into that necessarily. You can come along and catch a cult classic later on, but it's a little bit tougher. But these universal classics, things like the old Universal monster movies, or this type of movie. When I saw The Apartment, I hadn't seen it, and all I'd ever heard about was 12 Angry Men was another one I just watched earlier this year, where all I had ever heard about was how great 12 Angry Men was. Yeah. And it's all you ever hear about is how great this is and all that. And I sat down to watch it like, all right, we're going to take this in. I'm sure it's going to be a little bit slow, but it'll be fine. No, that movie like melted my brain, and I could not believe how good it was. And I still think about that movie almost every day since I've seen it. Yeah. At some point or another.
It's crazy good. Crazy good.
So how did this for you do as something that had been put up there as a classic and a Hitchcock, and your first experience of Alfred Hitchcock? How did that work for you? Did you feel some of that? Is it something where you would dive into and watch more Hitchcock movies?
I think so. Yeah. I'm blown away, because it was, you always hear about how fantastic it was. And I don't necessarily agree with people when they say a movie is fantastic, but in this case, I am. And I'm also trying to take things on their merits in the time that they're in, like you were saying. Mm-hmm. My experience with that partially is my experience from when I watched The Phantom Menace. When I first saw the trailer for The Phantom Menace, the trailer for The Phantom Menace was released with one of the Next Generation movies. I
Oh, they
can't
did?
remember which one.
That would have been
and
Insurrection at the time.
yeah, okay. And I, if I am remembering right, I did not expect it to be in front of that movie. I was not aware of that because we didn't, the internet wasn't the thing it is now.
Right.
And I'm sitting there, on the first day that it releases, and the Lucasfilm logo comes on, and the hair on my arm stood up. Okay, that's how Star Wars is for me.
Yeah.
Okay, and I thought the trailer was fantastic. I consumed every piece of media I could find leading up to Phantom Menace. It was a disappointment to me. And that's all, the reasons for that have kind of been hashed out to death. But I also realized that part of the reason it was a disappointment to me was because it didn't live up to what my expectation of what that movie was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So for movies like that, I have tried to, it doesn't always work because I get excited just like anybody else.
Sure.
What I try to do is I watch the initial trailer and then leave it alone so that I can walk into that movie and let the movie be what the movie is and not go in there with expectations of what it's going to be.
Yeah.
So,
which is not an easy thing to do.
Try to apply it for movies. No, it's not. It's not. When I go into movies like this, I try to apply that same mentality. Let the movie be what it is.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, that didn't work for me with what's that big movie with Audrey Hepburn?
Breakfast at Tiffany's?
Breakfast at Tiffany's did not work for me at all. There was just too much baggage in that the misogyny was all over the place, the racism and everything else. It didn't work for me. There's a lot of misogyny present, and I usually have a hard time with that. But I was able to get past that and really kind of accept this movie for what it is. And it's definitely lived up to the hype.
And it's interesting also because you're right, there is some of that is just the product of the time. It's the 1950s. It's written by a man. It's directed by a man. That's going to happen. It was not looked at as misogynistic in its time because that's just the world, how a lot of the world was or how it was portrayed. Looking at it through the lens of 2023, we're going to see things very differently. But I think also this movie does do a very good job of giving characters like Miss Lonely Hearts, Miss Torso, and Liza and Stella agency too. They're not like sure. Miss Torso is a perfect example of it. She is set up for almost the entirety of the movie to just be this pretty face, beautiful woman dancing in her apartment all the time. And that's not who she is. And we get that reveal at the end that she's not solely that. That's an aspect of her, but it's not who she is. And Liza being in love with Jeffries and us not fully understanding it, but then we kind of get an idea of that by the end. But also she at any point can leave and does kind of try to, even at one stage because he had the line of, can't we just keep things status quo? And I was just like, oh, you cheeseball. Like, just get out of there, lady. He is not worth it for you. But she doesn't.
No.
And it's her choice not to. And that was the thing that I did appreciate, was that there is agency there and they do have that choice. I think Hitchcock was pretty good about that for the most part. Like, and also, I'm glad that you really liked this one. What's great about it is you'll be able to watch more Hitchcock movies, and they're not all, they're all, a lot of them are suspenseful and thrillers, but they're not the same. It's not the same formula. It's not the same style. North by Northwest is a very different movie from this, is a very different movie from Psycho. And they all do things a little bit differently. And so I think you're going to I think you'll appreciate that and enjoy that a lot if you do start to explore kind of his movies a lot more. And they're all in the same era. Like they're all in that kind of 40s through the 60s and whatnot, early 70s. And I can remember like watching Alfred Hitchcock Presents when I was growing up, would show on reruns and stuff.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
But that's
And
great.
and what one of the cool things about it is you always hear about how influential he is on modern day cinema,
Mm-hmm.
and you can actually see the basis of that
Oh yeah.
in these.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's kind of cool to see. It's kind of cool to see. You get to see the origin of the derivative.
Yes. Yeah, you get to see the thing.
It is things we've seen before, but this is the original. This is where it came from.
Like if you a movie that I just saw recently was Nope from Jordan Peele. And you can see so much of the influence of Alfred Hitchcock in that movie. That the influence that he had and that Rod Serling had and some of these creators had on people like Jordan Peele, who are taking that, they're taking the influence of these filmmakers and they are not only adjusting it for today's audiences, but they're also adjusting it through their lens of their experiences. Jordan Peele is injecting a lot of social commentary into it from the perspective of who Jordan Peele is in his life, which, I mean, Serling did all sorts of that too. And I love seeing that. So you're right. It's great to go back and see where the influence came from, where the things started on. It's like listening to if you're somebody who's younger and you listen to Greta Van Fleet on the radio, the rock band, and you can go back and listen to something like Led Zeppelin and hear the influence of Led Zeppelin in Greta Van Fleet, or you hear the influence of some of these jazz musicians in certain things. Like, it's great to go back and experience that. And that's what I love about, and why I do think that it's great that we have so much entertainment at our fingertips, because there's so much new stuff coming out that is fantastic, but it's still great to go back and see some of the old things. One of the other shows that I do, if you're not familiar with it, listening to this one, is Those Were the Days. We talk about classic TV on that. And it's all TV shows pre-2000.
Oh, no, I was not aware of that one.
Yeah, so we do. We talk about basically if the show started before the year 2000, we'll discuss it at some point. We come up with different themes and everything all the time, but we've gone back and watched stuff like Lucille Ball or Green Acres and all of this, and it's stuff that some of it we grew up with reruns. Like the four of us that are on it are all right around the same age, kind of mid-30s into early 40s. But we also get sort of this swath, like my co-host Steven is 35, 36 years old, but he is definitely 100% like an old man. Like, he grew up watching, he skipped some of the stuff that would be on in the mid 90s to watch like reruns on Nick at Night, because those were the shows he wanted to watch. And so it's really fun though to go back and see this stuff and see how good Lucille Ball was and how funny she was.
Yes.
And
she was
like just amazing.
So good.
And then knowing that, like, again, they had to crawl so that other artists could walk, and to give us this new stuff. Carol O'Connor doing All in the Family, and that show is responsible for us having things like The Simpsons or Family Guy in a lot of ways. It's also responsible for us having a lot of other sitcoms and things like that. And I just love that. And so, like, going back and seeing things like Hitchcock, all of the stuff that he did, and then you can start to see like, oh, okay, now I see where that trope came from. Yeah. It's why at the beginning I was talking about slasher movies owing a lot to Halloween. And I think part of that is I just heard a discussion about that movie where one of the people in the discussion had never seen it before. They watched it for the first time and they didn't enjoy it. They were talking about how boring it was. And my thought was like, well, it was such a different time when they made that, but so much of what that movie did, you've seen the derivatives of and the build-upons, and taking that and refining that formula over the last 40 plus years. So if you can,
it still blows my mind that that's a William Shatner mask.
I know, or the fact that they made that whole movie for $300,000. Like, they made that movie for almost nothing.
Yeah, but all of those shows that you're talking about, I am Gen X. I'm going to be 54 in January. Okay, I am steeped in all of those old sitcoms because I didn't have anything else to watch when I got home from school. I was a latchkey kid. That's what was on. Was reruns of the Brady Bunch. I have seen every single episode of the Brady Bunch probably more than 20 times. Facts of Life, Different Strokes, Silver Spoons, all of that stuff. I watched all that stuff because that was what was on. I didn't have a choice.
And what's great
Gilligan's Island, holy moly.
Yeah. And what's great going back and looking at some of this old stuff too is the fact that, yes, there is a nostalgia factor to it, but there's also just really good artistry at play in a lot of it. Some of it less so. Some of it doesn't hold up as well. And aspects of it, this movie in particular, as you mentioned. Yeah. I mean, there's parts of Rear Window, while it's got an 8.5 rating on IMDb, the Rotten Tomatoes score, whatever metric you want to use to talk about this and the way people talk about Rear Window, it's always high praise. But it's not perfect. There are things, especially today, 70 years later, or almost 70 years later, that don't age particularly great. But that's part of what I love about film and television and books is that they're time capsules. They're a slice of what was going on then. You look at this movie, and this era of Hollywood-style filmmaking doesn't exist anymore. And really, in about 15 years from when this movie came out, thereabouts, would start to change. We would go away from these kind of studio soundstage productions to the 70s era and that sort of cinema verite idea of more realistic, gritty stuff, things like The French Connection, The Exorcist, all of that. So to go back and see this little time capsule of 1954, and we're watching a movie that literally was just one giant soundstage they built a big set on, and everything was filmed there, even though it's made to look like it's outdoors. Like, that kind of stuff is just cool to me. So it's fun to give that experience to someone else too. So I'm glad that you got to watch this, and I'm glad that you enjoyed it, because I do think that it is a very, very good movie, and that its classic status didn't turn you away too much.
No. That's another movie, actually, I've never seen. I've never seen The French Connection. I hear all about it. That car chase in it is like the pinnacle of what everybody talks about, but I've never actually seen it.
Yeah, that car chase is crazy. It's even crazier when you hear all the behind the scenes stuff with it, because
oh wow,
they didn't have filming licenses to film that. They didn't stage that car chase. They just put a dude in a car and said drive in New York City. Like, literally, people talk all the time about, oh, you couldn't make this movie today. Oh, you couldn't make that movie today. No, you literally could not do what they did in The French Connection today. You would get arrested in no time. Like, they put that on film and got away with it. And that just...
guerrilla filming still happens, but probably not to that scale.
Not to that scale, no. Well, thank you so much for being on this week. This was great. I'm glad that we got you back, because it was a fun conversation talking about Disney and animation, and now we get to go back and talk about some old Hollywood, and this was a lot of fun, so thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
If anybody wants to find you online, are you on any of the socials? Are you active at all, or just in Discord, or
what they've done to Twitter /X is kind of really turned me off, and I'm Blue Sky, but not really, and I'm not that active on.
Fair enough.
I'm basically in kind of the Frog Pants Discord,
Okay.
Your Discord.
Honestly, you're probably smarter for that, if I'm being honest. Like,
better for my mental health.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. We're definitely going to do this again. I'll have you back on anytime. We'll find another something for you to watch. Maybe another Hitchcock movie. Maybe not. We'll see. There's plenty out there, but thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. I do this show weekly. Record it Sunday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern time at twitch.tv/tvstravis. So you can come hang out like Cyrenex or Ace in the chat room if you want. Otherwise, the show comes out on Wednesdays, anywhere you get your podcasts, including YouTube. And tvstravis.com is an easy way to find the RSS feed. There's links there for places to find the show, to find other shows I work on, like Those Were the Days that I mentioned, as well as merchandise. There's a Patreon for this show. If you want to join that, it's as little as $1 an episode. It's patreon.com/WYHS. I am working on some exclusive content that's going to be going up for patrons only here very shortly. So if you want to get involved in that, you can join the Patreon. Otherwise, the show is always free. And if you do want to watch a video version of this or the podcast version through YouTube, a subscription on that channel helps it a ton. I'm really trying to start boosting subscriptions there just to get it more discoverable. And then I'm on all the social medias as TV's Travis because I have a problem. And but I'm there. So whether it's Threads or Blue Sky or even Twitter, Mastodon, you can find me if you want to. And I'm always happy to talk about movies, comic books, TV shows, music. Music is something I don't get to talk about enough, and I love to talk about it. So if you want to, start up a conversation with me. I'm always happy to do that. But until next week, which I have a fun one coming up for next week. Let me find this here real quick. Because my guest will be Charles McFall from Dragon Con. He's coming back, and we're going to talk about a movie with Ryan Reynolds in it I had never heard of before called The Nines. I know nothing about this movie, but he seemed to say...
No, I don't either.
He said it was a good one, so we're going to check that out, and that'll be next week. The Nines with Ryan Reynolds, and I don't know who else. I'm 100% in the dark on this one. So that's what's coming up next week. So until then, just remember, everyone, to enjoy your movies. And regardless of how crazy social media is, let's be excellent to each other.
Well, he's a salesman, isn't he?
Well, what would he be selling at 3 o'clock in the morning?
Flashlights.